The other one is going back to your childhood. You told, we talked about the bullying and all that, and you can go wherever you want with that. But I love the fact that you talked about how you blush and how you blush to
Yeah,
this day. And
right,
it
right.
sounds to me like it's been a gift because it seems to work so well with your characters.
It look, in the totality of my life, it's been a wonderful gift.
Mhm.
And I think when I reached the point, and this was one of those conversations that I had with my mother, who has been so good to me throughout my life. She's going to turn 90 in December, and
Wow.
she seems to be doing really, really well. And but she told me one day, as I was despondent about being teased, and I, of course, as a kid, I thought that was just incredibly immature for someone to tease someone about something that they had no control over. Well, of
Right.
course, that's what kids do.
That's what they
Kids,
do.
kids are brutal. They find
Jump
that
on it.
thing
Exactly.
and they work you with it to find out if you can handle it. And I don't know that that's what kids are. They're not looking to see if you can handle it, but once they determine you can handle it, it stops.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen anymore. But if you're vulnerable to that thing, you are going to be brutalized with it until you figure it out. And my mother told me the story about how when she was growing up that people called her little red tomato face, and she would get furious and yell and scream. And then, finally she just figured out that if she laughed with
Mhm.
them, that sort of drained the, I mean, it could be a shared thing, then
Mhm.
it could be something that was no longer this thing that they were going to poker with, but something that they shared together, and it was okay. And it took me, it took me a long time to get that, but it probably, well, long time. What's long time? It
Mhm.
probably took me well into my high school years to begin to get the picture that my overreaction, my um, indignation, righteous indignation about this was not going to make it stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
I mean, it was until I could blow it off and make it nothing, it was going to continue relentlessly.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and then as you get older, you realize it becomes. I think. I mean, I guess all I can just say, my blushing is my tendency to blush has been overall a very positive thing in my life,
Mhm.
but I don't get upset about it anymore either. It's just, it is what it is. Uh, I can't control it, and it works for me, and it's part of who I am, and I just accept that now, and I don't worry about it. I think if we anybody who has those things
Mhm.
that light them up, and we all have something. There's something about ourselves that we don't like.
Oh yeah.
It's just we're. I don't know. I don't know anybody who grew up feeling like they had the world by the tail. They may have acted like they did, but I don't know that anyone really believed they did. And if you could find that thing, if you were that person, if you was prepared to find the thing that might set somebody off, you'd find it eventually with
Oh yeah.
anybody. It's
Oh
just
yeah.
a matter of how hard you're willing to dig for it. I didn't want to dig for any of that stuff because I didn't want to encourage people to tease me about my blushing. So
Right.
I was not someone who was looking for, like, quid pro quo on this.
Mhm.
I wanted to leave other people's stuff completely alone in hopes that they would leave me alone. That's
Yeah.
not the way it works,
It
but
doesn't.
I wanted people to leave me alone about this. And it's like, so much, no such luck. You're never going to be left alone on that stuff. You
Yeah.
are who you are. You have to deal with that.
Right. Well, like I said, I think it's worked out for a positive on your end. Hey,
Yeah.
another one. And by the way, there's so much in this book. But the one there, your father has this plane crash that happens right by the family
Yeah.
ranch, and right, like
On the
literally right.
family ranch, right in front of us, right in front of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about that? But also, how did that affect your life? Because that's a big traumatic moment for a kid. I mean, geez.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I do write about this moment in 1963. It was August of 1963. So I'm like 7, something
Mhm.
like that. I just, yeah. And um, and my father was a pilot. I'd flown many places with my father and mother in a Cessna 172, Cessna 150 through the years. And but my father was sort of a daredevil with airplanes, and he would on his way home from some trip, maybe he'd flown up to Northern California to see his own mother. On his way home, he buzzed the ranch and flew over low and tipped his wings, and we had all been outside, we were all outside waving to him, and he went back over the trees and did a turn and came back over the pool, which was right near the family house, and the tail of the airplane clipped the top of an elm tree, and he was going way too slow anyway, and it clipped the top of and the airplane just fell like a stone and fell down, and he was able to flip the wings of the airplane sideways. The airplane went to full power, and the airplane just like landed in this beautiful big oak tree that 3 generations of my family had been sitting under 10 minutes earlier
Oh.
during an afternoon by the pool. We'd all just gone in to change for dinner, and it was like late afternoon. It was
Mhm.
4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. We're all getting ready for dinner. I think, like I'm the oldest of the three. My brother and sister, my brother's 3 years younger than I am. My sister's 4 years younger. I mean, I got what I was seeing. I understood what I was seeing. My brother and sister, I don't think really were processing at that moment
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
they had seen. And we were literally standing, uh, 50 yards from where the airplane went into the tree.
Oh man.
So, it just happened right in front of us. And I'll never forget my mother's scream when it happened. And my cousin, who lived about a mile away, arrived in his truck a few minutes later, not because he'd heard the crash, but because he'd heard my mother scream a mile away,
Wow.
and 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 came and climbed up into the tree. The engine was running at full power, gasoline's pouring out of the wings of the airplane. My father's unconscious, apparently, in the cockpit, and my cousin climbs up to turn off the engine because one spark would have exploded the whole thing. My grandfather, who was a little bit disconnected, so shocked, he walked out. He smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes. He's walking near the tree with a lit Lucky Strike cigarette in his hand.
Oh.
Gasoline is pouring everywhere. This
Oh
is
my.
high tech aviation fuel.
Oh.
I mean, it just was like that could have gone. I mean, it was a horrible moment, and we knew, gratefully, jumping to the end of the story, my brother and sister and I were rushed away from the ranch by my mother's sister and her fiance, and they took us back to our home and made us dinner. And it was like, three. I was sort of numb in the car, numb at dinner, not knowing what happened. My brother and sister were sort of fine. Everything was okay for them.
Mhm.
The phone rang, and 4 hours later, and it was determined, my father had survived. He was no broken bones. He was, he'd cut his head. He'd had a concussion,
Wow.
but it was not life-threatening thing. He was going to survive. Okay, I think
Mm.
it was, at the time, of course, you're just grateful that your father survived. Later, what processed for me is how incredibly irresponsible this was for him to be doing what he was doing, and the fluke of fate that the timing of this, that, 10 minutes earlier, 3 generations of my family could have been killed in like that instant. There were 15 people under that tree.
Oh my gosh.
Three members of 3 generations could have been killed or badly injured.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Who knows what would have happened? You just don't know. But I don't think I think that probably led to me. I mean, my father was great in an emergency situation. I mean, if something happened, he would intuitively would do the right thing. But he made some really bad decisions in areas like that in his life. And so I think the effect was that I don't think I could really trust him
mm-hmm,
as much as he was great in an emergency, but you didn't quite know what he might do in a situation for kicks because he was sort of a risk taker.
mm-hmm,
Um, and that was a little unnerving for a kid to see that, your father could do something really dumb.
mm-hmm,
And that it could be, at the time you're grateful, later you think, what else could happen here?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So just one of those weird things, but it's a moment that I'll never. There's some pictures in the book which you haven't seen, but there's some
Mm-mm.
pictures of the book of the plane and the tree. They're not great pictures. I couldn't find the FAA's pictures of the accident because those were really great pictures. These are sort of blurry Kodak snapshots of this, but
Mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know what it is, a tree. But it was that was a wild day that I will certainly never forget.
Yeah, I can see it. Hey, by the way, just so we don't forget, do you have a copy or anything that you can show them or any or not? Are you,
Oh, the book.
yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a copy. So this is the reader's copy. This is tells you it's a reader's version of the book. And I don't know. Yeah, you can't really read it because the screen is mirrored here. But
You can here you can see it. Yeah, you
you
can see
know
it.
what it is. But yeah. So I thank you for asking about that,
Of
and
course.
I'm very happy with the way the cover looks and the way the book lays out. And I think it's I mean, look, if you're interested in Little House, the title, hopefully all of our books, all of the Little House books that have been written by all the different members of our cast
Hmm.
all have Prairie in the title of the book.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's sort of that's the connective tissue that we have all decided on. And actually, I had not thought that in the beginning, but the publisher, who has not done any of the other Little House books, but the publisher who was familiar with all the other books, said we need to put Prairie in the title. And so and he offered the suggestion, he did, and I said, yeah, you got it, you titled the book, good for you, thank you for that. So yeah, John, we'll see how it goes, and we'll see how people respond to it. I really appreciate the fact, let me just say, I really appreciate the fact that you clearly did read the book.
Oh, I did. I did.
And at the very least, you carefully ran through it and found some things that were fun to talk about. I really appreciate
Oh,
that you
hey,
did
no,
that.
no doubt. Hey, by the way, when is it released?
So June 25th. So, a little bit more than I'm not sure when you're going to actually run this, but
It'll be around then, or just
yeah.
out,
So
just before.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. So June 25th, it's available for pre-order at Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. I hope that people who are, if they are inclined to buy the book, be great, go order it at Amazon. That would be at Barnes and Noble, great. But I hope people would consider walking into a bookstore, their favorite local bookstore, and asking for it.
Hmm.
I will be at Barnes and Noble on the 27th in Los Angeles at the Grove. The Grove's Barnes and Noble doing a signing. If you're in the area, if you're local to Southern California and you're listening to John's show, um, if you want to come to Barnes and Noble, and I think it's at 7 in the evening, something like that, but you could check that out at Barnes and Noble and at the Grove. It'd be great to see you there.
Very cool. And hey, one other thing I wanted to, in the book, if we've got a sec here, what was your take? Because you talked about it in the book, and I thought it was well handled. Two things, and maybe they're hitting on too much at once, but how Karen Grassle was kind of treated, when you were there. And
Yeah.
the other one would be when the affair happened with Michael Landon, how that was affecting the set.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could talk to either one of either or both.
Yeah, those are both delicate subjects within our Little House
Totally
family.
understand.
Um, yeah, but look, I did write about them.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I think, and I tried to be careful about the way or balance that out. But when I just leave it with when someone who is has such an impact on your life
Hmm.
is, maybe to say misbehaving or not being as respectful of a coworker as maybe you think they should be,
Hmm.
um, who or is doing something that affects everybody around them, on with maybe not, they don't think necessarily that it's going to be, that was hard, that those
Hmm.
were hard times. And I did write about both of those things in the book. um I love Karen. um I watched what she went through on occasion, not every minute, but
Yeah.
you could see things that would go on that he never would have. A child actor on the set would never have been treated that way.
Hmm.
um and I don't think the children really necessarily understood what was going on. The young children necessarily really understood what was happening when Michael's marriage was heading towards a conclusion and he was beginning this new life. Um, but it had to be excruciatingly difficult for his children, certainly for his wife at the time, to
Yeah.
to sense this was going on. And it was very difficult for members of the Little House family to sense that it was going on, because as the word got out about this, and inevitably the word always gets out about this, we started getting questioned about it
Hmm.
by media who wants to know what's going on. It just becomes this sort of sizzling story to tell. And I think the thing that was hard about it is that we were all put in a position where we had to deny what was right in front of us,
Oh, that's
you know,
hard.
where we had to be genuinely dismissive of something that was very obvious to
Hmm.
all of us at a point. And I think that was hard. And I don't know that, look, Michael's not here to defend himself about the why
Get it.
or how he did it. I think if he were here to defend himself and people wrote the story, I don't think he'd deny it.
Hmm.
And I think he was the kind of person he was so interested in people being authentic
Hmm.
and creating authentic moments with people. I think that he would have acknowledged years later that that was not his best moment.
Hmm.
And I think he could have done that. I think he was a big enough person to do that.
Hmm.
At the time, I just don't think he was thinking about that. He was thinking about needing to get the show done and what he was doing with the work and everybody. And he also had his own needs personally. And this is just where it expressed itself.
Hmm.
And maybe, he trusted us all to handle that information. But it was an awkward place to be put in. Now it's water under the bridge. And
Hmm.
Michael did marry Cindy, and they had children together. And so life goes on. And Michael had, after some difficult challenges with his children, with Lynn, that all worked out in the end. I mean, that, they had their coming together and acceptance of, of what was what, and so everyone, it all ended up fine. Everything ended up fine, and I think that's what the important thing is, really, is that it all ended up fine. I'm adding, because it was so impactful to me. That's why I ended up writing about it. And look, some people aren't going to like that I wrote about that. And I just say, it was something that had been living in me for 40 plus years, and it needed to be talked about. And, but all I would leave it with, buttoning it up, it was all fine in the end. We were all adults. We all worked it out. And it doesn't in any way, those things, those moments don't in any way erase the incredible creative work that he did, and that we all were a part of, and that we all are connected to, and proudly connected to, for as long as it is present in the public's consciousness. Really, really good stuff, John. And we're all proud of that.
Well, I think, I said at the top of this interview that you're raw in this book, and I wasn't just throwing that out there for, the sake of like pushing the book. It's true, it's sincere. How, by the way, at the very end, Michael's funeral, you said that you were invited. How, outside of, sure, I'm sure it was very sad. I can't even imagine it. But how important was it for you to be there to find that, that closure after you've been through this experience with him? And
I mean, I think
fair. I'm talking about the whole thing from the time he
right,
first brought you in to the end.
No. I mean, absolutely. It was very important for all of us to be there. And, our producer, Kent McCrae, who, Kent produced Michael's shows. Kent also produced Michael's funeral.
Oh, geez.
Did and did a beautiful job organizing that. And he called everybody personally, and he invited them. And, we were seated. The family, Michael's family, was behind a curtain, as is often the case in those situations, for their privacy, so that they could not be stared at and looked at. No, I don't think anyone would have done, but it was for their privacy. And Michael's Little House family, at least the cast, was seated in the front couple of rows of the chapel. Or I don't even know if it was, what's the right word for it. It's not necessarily a chapel. This was, but anyway, it was that. It was at the cemetery. Maybe, yeah. So, we were all there. It was very, Ronald and Nancy Reagan were there. They weren't sitting in the front row. They were way back in the, so it was a very special thing for Kent to place us in that situation with him. And it was, I can't imagine being that I would have wanted to be any place else in that situation, to just be part of that closure, not only for us, but for everybody else too, who was there. It was a very powerful time. I mean, you think back, Michael passed of pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed. He was gone 10 weeks later. I mean, that's an extraordinary, the speed with which pancreatic cancer overwhelmed him once he was diagnosed. And obviously he'd had it for a period of time. It had been working on him. He didn't know what was working on him.
Right.
But once he knew, that was just that Michael, who was so vital, so powerful, so huge in his life, could be taken by something that you couldn't see, that was not outwardly apparent in him, was really hard to imagine. And it's still hard to imagine. I mean, for Michael to have been gone at 54 years old, and the career that he'd had in 54 years, where he had been part of the television landscape of America in a really incredibly competitive world. He'd been part of that world for America for over 30 years
Yeah.
of his life is an extraordinary thing that
Mm-hmm.
he achieved. So for all of us to have a little to be associated with him through that and to have a chance to honor that. And Melissa gave a beautiful, Merlin Olsen spoke at his service, as did Melissa Gilbert. Both of them were extraordinary.
Wow, that had to be hard.
They were. I think Melissa's told stories about that, not knowing what she was going to say and how she was going to say it, but she was brilliant and clear and emotional, but not, you know, it was she didn't sit up on the at the podium and sob. She didn't do that at all. She held it together. She told beautiful stories about him, as did Merlin, and Merlin was exceptionally good at those kinds of moments as well. Um, it was a very special, memorable day.
Wow, wow. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you any longer. Dean, I could talk to you for another hour because there's so much in this book. I just want to tell everyone that he goes into Broadway. He goes into his time on the golf show Faraday.
Faraday,
And
Faraday, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
all the people he's met. Mary Hart, very special relationship there. Talk about raw. You're as raw as it gets. Just some really amazing moments. By the way, there was one in there. It was a smaller thing. It was with Mary Fran, who I gotta tell you, I always thought was gorgeous when she was on Newhart. I went to a couple of those tapings, and every time I saw her, I thought, my gosh, is this woman gorgeous? And then you
And
have it in the book that you had time with her.
a little evening, an evening's fling. Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, Mary was. I mean, look, I've always been, um, I've always been completely turned on to beautifully packaged women, I guess, as I like describing. Mary Fran was a beauty pageant girl, a
Yep.
woman. She understood about how to present herself as this very feminine woman. I've always been highly vulnerable to that and
Yep.
drawn to that. And she was one of those people, as was Mary Hart. She
Hmm.
had that quality as well.
Very strong
And
women too.
there were
Yeah.
others, but yeah, special moments, and hopefully, Mary Fran looking down would not be, in any way offended by what I
Oh,
shared.
not at
Who
all.
knows how Mary Hart's going to respond? I didn't talk to her about what I wrote.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll see.
Yeah, no,
We'll see.
I loved it. I really loved it. By the way, just last thing I got to tell you, having my background as an actor and coming into LA and driving in and seeing that Los Angeles sign, all that. And then you talk about Oakwood Apartments. I lived in Studio City right down the street. When I first
Yeah.
came, I got to tell you, I could not stop reading that whole section because I totally I couldn't relate to the success you had, but I could relate to the experience of that,
Okay.
and going to auditions and the rejection and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, it's all part. I wrote the book, John, as we wrap this up. I wrote the
Yeah.
book for, this was not supposed to be is not a super deep exploration of, my inner being. It's not that, but hopefully what it is it gives you a snapshot of my time from my point of view about some moments and people that were very important in my life, that were memorable in my life, because when I sat down to do this, these are the things that popped. I mean, look, after the fact, there are probably a dozen stories that should have been in the book that are not in the book, but as I was crafting it, the stories that I told are the stories that made the most sense in the moment, because they're the ones that came right to me, and that sort of, you have to go with that. So it's been an adventure, and thank you for asking me about it so thoughtfully. I'm very, very pleased that I'm going to tell everybody that when John Cato tells you he's going to read your book, John Cato is going to read your book.
I appreciate it because it's true. Well, Dean, I loved having you on. I look forward to whenever our next meeting is, and I'm wishing you tons of success. Dean, you want to just show the book one more time?
One more time, Prairie Man, My Little House Life and Beyond. Check it out.
Perfect. All right. Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Dean. I'll see you.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too.
As always, thanks for listening, and please hit the subscription button and the notification bell so that you can be notified when I have a new episode. And also go check out some of my other episodes, like Jerry Mathers, Henry Winkler, Judy Norton, so many. Enjoy.